Hello, everybody. You're very welcome to this series, the first in a series of webinars organised by Teachers for Palestine. We're an advocacy group, obviously made up of teachers, and we've organised this webinar to inform people of examples of fantastic activism and get some voices from Gaza and Palestine during this tragic time. We're teachers who believe that the urgency of now is something that we should be speaking about in our classrooms, and so that's what this webinar series is about. Before I introduce tonight's guests, or esteemed guests, I'm just going to run quickly through the week that we have forthcoming. So we'll get on to tonight's guests in a little bit. But tomorrow night, we've got a good lineup. We've got Professor Wahid Al-Mudal, who is a Palestinian academic who had been working in the University of Gaza, and he's going to speak about third level education. We've also got Dalia Al-Najjar, who's the founder and director of the Rajan Al-Najjar Bursary. We've got Abu Bakr Abed, who's a journalist from Gaza and an eyewitness to the genocide. And we've also got, all the way from Belfast, Jake from the Shanvans, who's recently been in the West Bank and has been an eyewitness to what has been happening there. So that's on Wednesday night. Then on Thursday, we're dedicating the entire evening to Salah Hijazi, who's the policy coordinator for the BDS campaign. And he's going to speak about the importance of BDS as a non-violent form of resistance in these incredibly distressing times. And then on Friday night, we're having a bit of a hoolie. Friday night we have a lot of names. It's going to be an evening of conversation, of hope, of music. We've got Liam O'Meanley, we've got Kitty O'Connor, going by the name Sail Him. We've got Martin Leahy, Jim Cullen, we've got Eileen O'Mara, we've got Dorothy Collins, the poet. We've got Iman Mohammed, who's an esteemed Palestinian photojournalist. We've got Fela Butler, who's been doing absolutely great work recently with the Heart of Gaza exhibitions, which she's been running across the country. And we've also got Claire Liddy from Palestine GAA. So that's going to be, we don't know if we're going to, well, that one will probably go over an hour a wee bit, and hopefully it'll be a celebration in a time of despair, I suppose. It's a kind of a juxtaposition. But anyway, now tonight, without further ado, I'll go on and introduce my guests. First up, we've got Bernadette McAliskey, and she needs no introduction, really. She's articulate, she's erudite, she's passionate, and she's urgent. She's always been an advocate for the underdog. She's been political all her life, but she's somebody who many consider far too honest to be a politician. In the 6 counties here up north, and of course all over the Ireland, we're people who have emerged from oppression into some sort of semblance of freedom. And that's why the vindictive murder of a race of people, which is currently happening in Palestine, hurts us so much, because we can see that there's absolutely no need for it. We can see that if people are treated with respect and with justice, then there's no need for any violence, no need for any war, and people can coexist peacefully. That has always been Bernadette McAliskey's message, and she is someone who we in the nationalist community up north are really, really grateful for her current position, because she played a big part in getting us to where we are. Just a quick one. There's been a wee bit of a confected controversy about a certain hip hop group from Belfast who sarcastically and sardonically said a few years ago that you should go out and you should kill a Conservative politician. Now, of course, we don't condone that. That's one thing, but it takes a totally different type of person to walk and stride across the floor of the House of Commons and slap a Conservative politician and a Conservative minister in the face. And that's the person who we have with us here tonight. And that is Bernadette McAliskey. And she did that to Reginald Malding, as all her parents have told us, because he was trying to cover up the death of innocent people on Bloody Sunday in Derry. Now in Gaza, every Sunday is a bloody Sunday. Every Monday is a bloody Monday. Every Tuesday is a bloody Tuesday. Every day is bloody. Every month is bloody. Every year, the last year and a half have been unspeakably bloody. And Bernadette is going to speak about that situation. She's going to speak about her activism in general, and it's my absolute pleasure to pass you over now to Bernadette McAliskey. Bernadette, if you just want to unmute yourself and fire away.
Okay. Unaccustomed as I am to talking to myself on a screen, you're all very welcome. I like to do real-time meetings and engage with the people I'm talking to but also it's very important to use the opportunities we have through social media to extend our networks right across the island. And people tend always to I don't know why it particularly interests them to note that I walked across the floor of the House of Commons when a young MP and struck the Home Secretary. The reason that I did it was that the British Army had just days previously opened fire on an unarmed, peaceful demonstration and killed 13 people. And I was the only member of the British Parliament to have been a witness to that. And the rule and tradition of Parliament was that in any emergency debate arising, once the front bench and the leaders of the opposition had spoken, that the next person to speak or persons to speak would be eyewitnesses to the event, those with a particular involvement in the event on both sides of the House. So I should have spoken immediately after the front and opposition benches, and I got up to speak and was never called, and the emergency debate was closed and I wasn't allowed to speak. And I rose on a point of order and asked if that was in order. And in a debate between myself and the speaker asserted that I had no right to speak. Save that right, were his words. Save that right given to me by him. So that kind of struck a chord, and I replied, the Honourable Lady, which is how they refer to you, the Honourable Lady has such rights as it is within her power to exert. And I walked across the House and I struck the Prime Minister. The question that I had asked was it in order for the Home Secretary to come to the House and tell lies, lie through his teeth about a massacre deliberately orchestrated and carried out by the British Army, I believed under the instructions of Ted Heath's government. It took 30 years for the truth of Bloody Sunday in Derry to finally emerge. That we were right, that nobody on that march had fired on the troops. There was no military organisation hiding in the ranks of the demonstration, and that the government had for 30 years covered up that reality, that the public media had in the immediate wake of the event and for 30 years covered up that atrocity. But as yet, we still do not have justice, because there was no admission on the part of the British government that had not been simply a number of over-enthusiastic members of the parachute regiment embarking on a free-for-all and a solo run and running amok in breach of their professional discipline. That had been a decision taken at cabinet level long before January 1972. And the parachute regiment had already killed other innocent people in other events, from the introduction of internment in 1971, right up, that was August, right up to the events in Derry. And the sole purpose was to terrorise peaceful mass demonstrations for equality of citizenship, which was the basic demand of the civil rights movement. When I was an MP, which was a very short period of time, people keep talking about me as a politician as if I'd spent my life in career politics. I was elected in 1968, and I served through two electoral periods between 1969 and the end of 1973, which was about whatever that was, 4 years. And it was enough. It was enough for all of us. At one stage, someone said, what harm could the young woman do in the short time of the by-election and the general election? And they lived to rue that statement. But while I was in the House of Commons and involved, I could see that the injustices that I was aware of in my own life, the injustices that had created the Northern Ireland civil rights movement, and then the People's Democracy, which was the student, more radical movement, were not confined to the north of Ireland. I became very much aware because of the labour movement and the division in the labour movement over the question of Palestine and Israel. I became very aware of the plight of Palestinians, as I understood it, going back to 1960, going back to my awareness of 68 and 69. And I have been campaigning for the rights of Palestinians, for the freedom of Palestinians, for the freedom of Palestine since 1968. And it defies all my humane and intellectual understanding, other than through having a particular understanding of world politics that developed over the years and brought me to socialism. How a so-called civilized democratic world post the Second World War and the creation of the United Nations and the United Nations Charter could possibly in this, the 100th anniversary of the creation of the UN Charter of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, in the wake of fascism of the 1930s and the Holocaust inflicted upon the Jewish population of Germany, of Poland, of Europe, how the civilized modern Western democracies, how the developing world could continue to allow Israel to behave the way it did, in breach of every United Nations resolution, in breach of every human decency, of everything that over 50 countries signed up to, in order to ensure that that kind of genocidal behavior would never be allowed to happen again. And of course, Palestine has not been the only place over that period where it has occurred. But it is the only place where it has consistently, for every day of the lives of the people living there, being the strategic, deliberate policy of a government over all of that time to drive people from their homeland, to eradicate any memory of their existence, to fully occupy and seize their territory, and to build within it a colonial project, which was never the request of those who survived the Holocaust. The idea to build that state pre-existed from the First World War and was part of a Zionist right-wing elitist movement of very, very wealthy Jewish people and of white Christian supporters of the idea, for two different reasons to my mind. One was to create a powerful Jewish state on the part of the Zionists, ourselves alone, nobody else. And the other on the part of white Christian right-wing anti-Islamists, and for want of a better expression, downright greedy capitalists, and politicians and colonialists and empire builders, to create for themselves within, as they saw it, the Islamic Middle East, a foothold for Western colonialism. And it's not for me to tell the history of Palestine. That's for Palestinians to tell their own history. And sometimes we in Ireland overemphasize a reality that there is scarcely a method of oppression tried in the world that was not first tried in Ireland by the British. But while the principles remain the same, the extent and longevity of the suffering doesn't easily translate. And nothing except perhaps the famine, which was also a genocidal project on the part of the establishment. But nothing that we have ever suffered bears comparison in pain and continuity and horror with what the Palestinians have suffered. And that explains our instinctive intergenerational empathy with the cause of Palestine, as it does with most anti-colonial struggles. But we have a duty to do more than shout, "Me too, we understand your pain, we love you." We have to act. We've seen our government talk and talk and talk about peace in the Middle East, about all of it having to end. And we hear echoes of it in the north. A government that left us behind, a state that left us behind, but we'll be home some of these days. But leaving that aside for the moment, we have to do something to make the government of Ireland act. They have reneged on the Occupied Territories Bill. As with South Africa, they have reneged and dallied and tarried and hidden on the whole question of boycott. They slobber about peace and two-state solutions. There is no, and this is my personal view, there is no two-state solution in the Middle East possible. Just as the two-state solution has never worked here. A single pluralist state that respects every human being living within it equally is how states are supposed to be organized. Not states that have to be contrived by artificial mechanisms to ensure that everybody stays on their own side of the line and doesn't kill the people on the other side. That is an end of war. It's not peace. So we have a big task in front of us. And I'm speaking tonight to teachers. I spoke a couple of weeks ago to young, not all young, to barristers, to lawyers and barristers. Because there are, we all have to act. But there are people in positions of authority and power and privilege that can sometimes do more than others, and sometimes are afraid to do as much as others because the penalties in terms of their professions and positions are heavier in many ways in the initial stages of any struggle. That's to deter their activity. And it's because they have more privilege. On the other hand, it's very easy. It was very easy for me as a young person to do whatever I liked. I had very, very little to lose. And the people who have least to lose are generally the people to be found first in in the front line of battle. But if we are to peacefully resolve the issue of Palestine, then we need to be making our government act in defense of the United Nations, act in the defense of Palestine, not be complicit as it is with the United States of America in allowing planes to pass through Ireland unchecked to see if they're carrying weapons or materials to be used in the war against the Palestinians. The government has recognized the Palestinian state, and in a conversation with Michelle earlier this evening, we were talking about that and the opportunity it gives, in much the same way it gave us an opportunity post the war in the North to use education in a way. My apologies, my phone has rung, but it will stop. But to use education, to use the curriculum when the curriculum allows, to educate children. That is activism. Teachers aren't really, as powerless as you think. Children believe you. Children trust you. And children care about other people. My own grandchildren boycott McDonald's, boycott everything that they hold dear that has sugar in it, and know how long this struggle may take. My 10-year-old grandson said, I may never taste a McDonald's chicken nugget again till I'm 70. If that's as long as it takes, he's there and he's 10. So we can do these things. We can do them all, and they seem daunting. But we have to stop just saying we're with you and doing something to halt Israel in its tracks. Boycott works. We invented it in Ireland. It works. So we need to put our backs into building a very, very effective boycott campaign. It is affecting McDonald's. It is affecting Starbucks. But we can do more. We need to be more creative as well in pushing the government forward. It was a pity we couldn't get Sinn Féin to stay out of the Paddy Day bash last year. They stayed out this year, under pressure of the consequences, the electoral consequences in the South, for their not listening to the people the year before. So I would say to people, don't get frustrated. I was listening to people are starting to pick holes in kneecap. It's going to be kneecap's fault because they shouted up Hamas and up Hezbollah and made an insensitive remark in terms of dead politicians, the only good politician being a dead one, when a number of British MPs have actually in recent days been murdered by the right wing in the United Kingdom. But the problem isn't kneecap or Hamas or the Houthis. If kneecap had been as old as me, they'd have done what I did. I merely said people complain. At a march in Dublin, I said people complain about the fact that we don't mention the 7th of October. It wasn't the start that we don't mention Hamas, that we don't mention Hezbollah, we don't mention the Houthis. So I mentioned them all. I just stopped and mentioned them all and said, that's mentioned and we'll get on with the work. Because they're not the problem. As in the North, they're the consequence of the problem. They're the consequence of a government that systemically closes off all peaceful opportunity to resolve the problem. That's why armed resistance against oppression exists. And a country that illegally occupies another as Israel has done, as Russia has done, does not have the protection of the right of self-defense in those territories because they are the aggressor. And if you look at the differences between the way we look at Ukraine, the way our government looks at Ukraine, the way our government deals with and supports every sanction on Russia, the way Claire Daly has been pilloried for making those positions clear when she was in Europe, we can see all of that. And then people look at the horror of Palestine and they get distraught and disturbed, and they think that they need to do more and more and more, and despair moves in. You can't afford to despair. We cannot afford the self-pity of despair because nothing bad is happening to us. Despair is the sole right of Palestinians, and they are not despairing, and they have never despaired. So I would like everybody this week to double their efforts, to concentrate on what you can do, what you can safely do, what more you can do, and encourage others to do more. Know where the red lines are and work with those on the right side of the line. But don't feel the necessity to police the revolution. Don't feel the necessity to police the solidarity movement or to give the wisdom from the safety of your home in a relatively peaceful Ireland as to how those fighting for their very lives should conduct their battles. I hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank you, Bernadette.
And I'm going to stop there.
I was just about to, I'm glad you stopped yourself. I was just about to stop you. I felt fair awkward. I'm glad I didn't stop you until I did, because I think the last point that you made is the most purient point for me. It is a very dark situation. It is a very despairing situation, but you're right. We don't have the right. We don't have the right to, we should get on with our lives. We should laugh, we should love, we should be with our families, we should be present, and we should keep doing the little things that we need to do. Thank you very much for your inspiring words. If you wouldn't mind, Bernadette, would you mind answering a few questions or just listening to a few comments that came up over the course of your talk? The first one I want to share with you is kind of related to, I suppose, how we are getting the information about what's happening in Palestine. We're getting it. A lot of us are getting it through our phones. A lot of us have seen far too many children blown apart in the last year and a half. But we're not typical of the population. Most people are not seeing that. Most people are getting their information through the mainstream media. Stephen McGlinchey on here says Bernadette should be a guest on every news program, every morning radio show, every newspaper. She's a diamond, and her perspective has been shamelessly neglected. And that's not a question, more a comment. And I would wholeheartedly concur with that. I do want to talk a wee bit. You talked about like Western democracies earlier on, and there's a question there. Has there been consent manufactured within a lot of these Western democracies for what's happening in Gaza? Do you believe that has been the case, and why is that? And why isn't journalism doing its job? Where are the brave journalists? Where are the brave news editors? What has happened to the system of journalism that is supposed to be informing us about what's happened in the world?
Well, I think the two questions are related. There's a very good reason why I wouldn't be on any mainstream media program. It is not in the interests of the people who control the media, be that the state in some media, but mostly private millionaires and billionaires and corporations and shareholders whose purpose in life is to make even more money and who are addicted to greed and power. No useful purpose is served to those people by encouraging the people who buy their newspapers and watch their programs to have their ears polluted which would be their point of view, by the things that people like me have to say. They have no, I think the myth that we all believe in is that we live in peaceful and working democracies. We don't. We don't. The sharp end of the wedge is Palestine and oppression. It's a war in Ukraine, it's a war in Sudan. But the core problem is the social and economic and political system in which we live. We are in Ireland fortunate at the minute to be only ankle deep in the rise of fascism. America is up to it in the neck. Europe is up to it in the waist. And yet people still believe that we live in some kind of representative democracy where the people govern and where the people's will is sovereign. That's not the case. It's not the case. It is why, as I say before, that it's not simply that Western democracies are complicit with Israel. They created it for the purpose of saving the system they believed in. And that system is capitalism, and it has now been almost totally directly captured by business and global capitalist interests. And that's a conversation for another day. But all those things are linked. World poverty, homelessness, racism, prejudice, ignorance, as people are encouraged to blame each other. All those things are linked, but the people carrying the brunt of that struggle at the minute are not the people of Europe, with the exception possibly of the ordinary people of Ukraine and the Russian-Ukraine border area. That battle is still, as it always was, the brunt of it is being carried in the Middle East and the Southern Hemisphere, in Africa and South America.
Thank you, Bernadette. And following on from that, you mentioned our responsibility as teachers, and what you're talking about there is, how do you, the point that you're making there is that we're living in an essentially corrupt world, that the world of our childhoods, where we thought that there was an honest broker, that the governments were broker, that democracy was an honest system, all those things are being really challenged and shook. And there's a lot of people becoming completely disconnected to society, and hence we see the rise of the right wing and so on and so forth, disconnected from society, because society isn't working in their interests, and we're not getting a fair shake. How do you communicate that concept? I work with 9 and 10-year-olds.
Well, I'll tell you this: 9 and 10-year-olds understand that more easily than 20 and 30 and 40-year-olds, because children's minds retain a curiosity and a humanity that is instinctive in all of us. The education system itself is designed not to teach kids to think critically. See, I'm not talking about indoctrinating children. If teachers taught children that being kind is more important than being seen to be clever, if children teachers taught children to think critically, to think with their brains, to interrogate and not believe answers that sound wrong to them, rather than please the teacher. If teachers thought children could organize and think and experiment and ask questions and change the curriculum. I remember one of my own children was going to leave school at 12 because she'd learnt all the tables in the table book, and she could both read and write and had read all the books. And I said, you have to stay at school because there are a lot of other things to learn. And she said, I know, that's why I'm leaving. I'm going to go to the library.
Bernadette, on that note, I hate to cut across you, but as you predicted at the start of the meeting, we're going over time, and the problem is I could probably listen to you, and a lot of other people could probably listen to you all night. We have to be fair to Ghada, who is going to come in now. So I'm now going to pass over to my brilliant colleague Deirdre. I want to thank you very much for your time. I wonder if you'll stay on the call with us.
Yes, I'm going to wait and hear. I'm really here to hear Ghada myself.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, without further ado, I'm going to put myself on mute. I might turn my video off as well because I'm sick of looking at myself here. And I'll pass over to Deirdre.
First of all, Bernadette, thank you so much for just such a powerful and inspiring talk. I'm personally very grateful. My name is Deirdre McAliskey. I'm from on Spiddale in the Connemara Gaeltacht in the west of Ireland. I suppose before I introduce our next guest, I'd just say that the history, the story of Palestine resonates so strongly with the people of Ireland, the people, not necessarily our government, but the people. The enforced genocidal famine, as Bernadette rightly called it, the mass immigration, the history of colonization, and it pales in comparison to what's being experienced by the people of Palestine, but it does make us desperate to help, desperate to do what we can. So on that note, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. So Ghada Karmi was born in Jerusalem. The violent creation of Israel in 1948, the Nakba, forced her and her family to flee into exile. They moved to England, where she grew up and was educated. She practiced as a doctor for many years. She also held a number of research appointments on Middle Eastern politics and culture at the School of Oriental and African Studies and in the universities of Durham and Leeds, and was an associate fellow of the Royal Institute of International Affairs. Ghada was also a research fellow at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter. That's a very impressive list, Ghada. She is without a doubt one of the leading Palestinian writers and activists, and we're absolutely delighted and honoured to welcome her here this evening. So Ghada, I'm going to hand the microphone over to you and let you speak to us, the teachers and students in Ireland.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I cannot tell you how I feel having listened to Bernadette, who said so many things that I would have said myself. And in a way, I'm actually wondering how much I can add, really. So let me start, because I know we're running short of time. Let me start by giving a historical perspective on the tragedy that is before our eyes in Gaza and the West Bank, and for the Palestinians. You know, of course, the story did not start on October 7th. It started a very long time ago. You mentioned that my family was expelled, had to flee in 1948. That was the date on which the State of Israel was created. On the 15th of May this year, Israel will be 77 years old. Now, at the time, we fled, were expelled, and had to find a way of surviving. So we did as well as we could. Nobody very much reflected on what had been done to us by a combination of British colonialism and Zionism. We didn't have the time, the energy, the ability to reflect on what had happened, and to try and work out a way in which we could return to our homes. We just didn't have that luxury. We had to survive, and largely the Palestinian people did. more than half of them, of course, 3/4 of them, had been removed from Palestine in 1948, leaving a minority who stayed on and were under military rule by Israel well into the 1960s. And these so-called Israeli Arabs, in other words, Palestinians with Israeli citizenship, form about 20% of today's Jewish Israeli population. So, so going back to the fact that we, having been forced out of our homes, having to try and stand up on our own 2 feet, which we did, and as best we could. In my case, as you've heard, I benefited from living in the first world, which meant that I had a very good education. I was indeed trained in medicine, and I worked as a doctor for many years before I turned my attention fully to political activism and political work through various academic institutions. So that's really, if you like, the sort of background to the current tragedy. Now, where do we, I mean, I don't want to take up too much time describing the dreadful situation in Gaza and the West Bank, because it's very important, I think, to take the opportunity of this meeting to ponder on crucial issues which will determine the future. That is what I think we ought to be talking about. But let me just say briefly that Gaza, after October 7th, has been put through the most excruciating experience of genocide, of constant bombing, of starvation now. Its educational system, among everything else in Gaza, smashed, but this is of interest and importance to school teachers, that Israel targeted the educational system because it knows very well that education was always very, very important to the Palestinians. You know, you have to understand that when you don't have a country, what do you really have? How do you survive? Well, one of the most important and significant ways in which the Palestinian people carried on and formed a resistance movement and got themselves onto the world stage was through education. It's very, very deeply important for Palestinians that their children should be educated and, if you like, armed with the tools to live, to survive in very difficult circumstances. The Israelis know that very well, and so they struck out at all the educational facilities, schools, universities, teachers. They destroyed archives, they destroyed books, they destroyed the environment so that none of these could be rebuilt. They knew very well what they were doing. And it's really a miracle that the Palestinians survive to continue fighting and telling the story. Now, there are so many aspects to this dreadful situation that I would want to talk about, but I don't have the time. One thing that immediately should strike all of us is the way that the media has facilitated and enabled the genocide. I would go so far as to say that without the media cover provided to Israel and provided to the supporters of Israel, the genocide could not have taken place. I'm convinced of that. And as you see today, this media disinformation, misinformation, the way that opposing views are silenced is as active as ever and covers Israel's crimes all the time. One thing that's very recently struck me was the coverage of the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. And really, all the main media covered this with hushed tones, great respect, with adulation. And the question uppermost in my mind was, what are the people celebrating? What is it they're celebrating? That after the Second World War, when the international order, the one we've lived with since that time, was created, when the concept of international law, the provisions to make it impossible to have a second, a repeat genocide, as the one that the Nazis had enacted. All these things were created in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War. What are they? Where are they now? They're all smashed, completely smashed by Israel and its friends, and principally, of course, the United States. So really, it went through my mind, what are the people celebrating? Shouldn't they actually sit down and ask themselves, how is it that after a terrible genocide in the Second World War, after millions lost their lives, is it really feasible to tolerate what is being done to the Palestinian people? Is it? Doesn't matter that they're Palestinians. What matters is they're human beings, and that's what's being done to them. Now, I know that Ireland has a very good reputation in regard to the Palestine issue. It's relatively very advanced in that sense, and quite rightly so, and as it should be, given Irish history, given the way that we, the Palestinians, you, the Irish, are both victims of British colonialism. That's really the truth, because it was British colonialism that created Israel, and it's the same impulse that continues to support Israel until this day. So that has been welcome for us. But of course, as Bernadette pointed out, it's not enough. More needs to be done. Ireland needs to do much more. It needs to be more brave. It needs to be braver, and it needs to take up a much more forceful position on this issue. Now, I want to wind up by saying something about the responsibility of school teachers. You see, I want to stress that one of the main reasons that Israel has got away with so much is to do with the way the whole history of the creation of Israel is distorted. It's not told as it happened. The truth is hidden from most people. I can't blame ordinary citizens from being mystified about how the conflict arose in the first place. They're constantly faced with the story as if it started from the moment that it is being spoken about. There's very rare attempts to take it back to its roots. I am a firm believer that if the way that Israel came into being was told as it really happened, and that the truth was never disguised by the usual mythology about the Old Testament, which was compounded, of course, by the story of the Holocaust. Not that it was a story, but the way that it was used to justify and legitimize Israel. If that could be clarified, if that could be removed so that people could see clearly what in fact happened. That what you have here is a classic settler colonialism story in which colonial powers created a colony called Israel. Israel is a settler colony. It's nothing other than that. And that this settler colony has been maintained and strengthened and has been enabled to flourish by Western powers who are themselves colonialist in a thoroughly colonial enterprise to dominate a region of the world which is resource rich, that is the Middle East, and therefore Israel was seen as a tool, a vehicle for imperialist rule of an important area. Now, if the story were told exactly like that, as I've told it, and that subsequent clashes with the native population, the Palestinians, between the settler colony and the native Palestinians have all to be seen in the context of resistance on the part of natives against their oppression by a colony, by a settler colony supported by colonialists in the West. If it was seen like that, I believe that matters would be much clearer for ordinary people. So my request to teachers listening to this is, please take the responsibility for teaching the Israel-Palestine story as it really is. No mincing of words, no liberal nonsense, no dwelling on the sufferings and the persecution of the Jewish people throughout history. Nobody's denying that. The question is, why would a people who had suffered in the West and at Europe's hands end up being recompensed for that suffering by taking the country of another people, none of whom was responsible for persecuting the Jews? Why is that permissible? And how is it that we can end this abuse of a people whose country has been lost as a reward for a persecuted people, persecuted by the very Western states who created Israel and now support Israel? And that's really something that I would very much like to see. I want to end on telling you that the future is currently very, very dark for Palestinians. It's dark. It's desperate, really. But as somebody said before, we cannot afford to despair. We must fight on, because in the end, we will win. Thank you.
Ghada, thank you so much. I feel like applauding on my own here in my room for you, especially your closing words, because it is very important to leave people, I feel, with some glimmer of hope. And to go back to your point, to teachers specifically, certainly in the Republic of Ireland, and I'm sure in the north of Ireland also, the formation of the United Nations is covered on the history curriculum at junior level, so at the age of 15, thereabouts, 16. And Israel and Palestine are discussed in a very general way as part of that course. But really, as teachers, we have to take individual responsibility and to tell the truth. And I don't know how many of us at the moment have been brave enough to do that so far. But I think you've made the clarion call, and it's up to teachers. You mightn't always have a whole school approach, but teachers can certainly, it's part of the curriculum. You know, we're expanding upon it a little bit, but it's there in the textbooks. So we have the freedom to do that as individual teachers. I'm just going to, if you don't mind, ask you a few questions that have come in via the chat. So I'm going to be looking at my phone for a moment while I'm reading them out. A few comments and a few questions. So first of all, one of our teachers received a question from a student. Bear with me. Okay, so a 17-year-old student from Bangladesh who's Muslim and a beautiful soul has an idea and is wondering, is it feasible? So the tract of land that is known as the Palestinian territories should be reclassified, a neutral zone which accommodates all those that identify as children of Palestine, a holy land once again. So I don't know if you can give any feedback on that concept from this young man from Bangladesh.
Look, thank you very much. It's a very nice thought. But what we're really after, and I think, if I can suggest, you want to emphasize, is that the Palestinian people, most of whom, as I explained, were expelled and ended up in refugee camps or in exile, people like me, these people have to go home. They have to go to the land that is currently called Israel and the occupied territories, so-called. The reality is this is Palestine, which has been colonized. But in the end, its original inhabitants, wherever they live now, have to go home. And they have to go wherever they need to go in their own homeland, not just in the occupied territories.
Thank you, Ghada. I saw Bernadette raising her hand in support, her arm in support, when you mentioned that they have to be allowed to go home. We wholeheartedly agree. A second question, in the context, this is from Becca, in the context of organizing, how do we protect / buffer / recover from the splitting that happens across movements and work together to build unity and power across the movement? I don't know if you have any suggestions or if you can speak to that.
I really think that is such an important question, because look, we have many problems as Palestinians, as political activists, as people interested in justice. We've always had a problem that those people on the right side of history, if you like, suffer from divisions, splits, disagreements, usually very bitter. And it's so foolish. It's so foolish. We need unity. We need to get together. But there is something that human beings generally suffer from, and people on the left suffer from particularly, which is their inability to distinguish between what is important and what is more important. Always the important seems to confuse people. They forget about the more important. So it is more important to adhere to your final goal than it is to quarrel amongst yourselves about how to get there. Always keep your eye on the ball. And all I can say is, people have to be told that bluntly, to stop quibbling over differences which are, in the scheme of things, minor when you put them up against the main and final goal, which is the more important.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've a couple of comments, and then I'm going to take one last question. Fadi Mustafa said, can we stop using the term democracies? We are all insulting our intelligence when we do so. We ourselves are being hypocritical when we do. Don't know if you agree with his statement.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. And a very short statement here from Colm: white Europeans are responsible, which is concise. It's to the point, but it's true. And one last one. So from Munser Connell, incredible message about the need to educate. Teachers in Ireland keep coming up against management who say we have to remain neutral in the genocide. What do you say to this argument?
We're not talking about the genocide, because the answer to that is we're talking about the history of how all this came about. So we're not addressing, I mean, the answer should be, we're not talking about one particular phase in a very long history. We are talking about that very long history. And pupils need to have a solid foundation which is based on historical fact. That's the answer.
That's the answer. That's the answer. Ghada, it has been an absolute pleasure and excuse me, privilege to listen to you. I'm so grateful to both you and to Bernadette for passing on your wisdom to us, and we will do our utmost to do as you have asked us to do, and to raise a generation of people who are happy, willing to be active for the right reasons. We're going to sign out now. We'll be back again tomorrow evening with a great evening of talks. We hope people will join us. And once again, from the Teachers for Palestine, Ghada and Bernadette, mille buchas. Thank you both so much.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here and particularly to listen to Bernadette.
I just want to add my thanks to you, Ghada. That was absolutely inspirational, and yeah, the right of return is where we go from here. I think that should be the focus of future activism, and that's what we're going to tell our kids.
Yeah,
they're carrying out an ethnic cleansing in plain sight. They've lost the right to occupy the land. It belongs to the Palestinians. Thank you both so much.